The real story of the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War, known in Vietnam as the Resistance War against America, or simply the American War, was a protracted conflict that spanned from 1955 to 1975, pitting communist North Vietnam against non-communist South Vietnam and its chief ally, the United States. Rooted in centuries of Vietnamese resistance to foreign domination, it evolved into a Cold War proxy battle, costing millions of lives and reshaping global politics. From the North Vietnamese perspective, it was a righteous struggle for national unification and independence. For many South Vietnamese, a defense against communist aggression. And for Americans, a misguided effort to contain communism that spiraled into tragedy. This narrative draws from diverse viewpoints to reveal the war's complexity, beyond the oversimplified tales of hubris and defeat. Colonial roots in the First Indochina War, pre-1954. Vietnam's story begins with French colonialism in the 19th century. France colonized Indochina, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia in the 1880s, exploiting its resources and imposing harsh rule. Vietnamese nationalism simmered, inspired by figures like Ho Chi Minh, who founded the Indochinese Communist Party in 1930. During World War II, Japan occupied Indochina, but Ho's Viet Minh guerrillas resisted both Japanese and French forces, aided by the U.S. Office of Strategic Services. In 1945, Ho declared independence, quoting the U.S. Declaration of Independence, but France sought to reclaim its colony. The First Indochina War, 1946-1954, ensued, with the Viet Minh employing guerrilla tactics against superior French firepower. China and the Soviet Union backed Ho after 1949, while the U.S. funded France to counter communism. The decisive blow came at Dien Bien Phu in 1954, where Viet Minh forces under General Vo Nguyen Giap besieged and defeated the French, forcing their withdrawal. For North Vietnamese, this was a heroic victory in a millennia-old tradition of repelling invaders. For the French, a humiliating end to empire. The Geneva Conference divided Vietnam at the 17th parallel. Communist Democratic Republic of Vietnam North under Ho, and the State of Vietnam South under Emperor Bao Dai, later replaced by Ngo Dinh Diem. Elections for unification were promised in 1956 but never held, as Diem feared a communist win. From Hanoi's view, this partition was artificial, imposed by imperialists. South Vietnamese leaders saw it as a bulwark against northern aggression. Escalation and U.S. involvement, 1955-1964. The U.S., viewing Vietnam through a Cold War lens, supported Diem with aid and advisors to build a stable South Vietnam. Diem, a Catholic in a Buddhist-majority nation, cracked down on communists and dissenters, alienating peasants through land reforms that favored landlords. North Vietnam, backed by China and the USSR, infiltrated the South via the Ho Chi Minh Trail, supporting the National Liberation Front, NLF, or Viet Cong, insurgents formed in 1960. Viet Cong fighters, often local Southerners, blended with civilians, using hit-and-run tactics. From the North's perspective, this was a people's war for liberation. South Vietnamese officials decried it as terrorism sponsored by Hanoi. U.S. involvement deepened under Presidents Eisenhower and Kennedy, who sent advisors, eventually 16,000 by 1963. Diem's repression sparked Buddhist protests, including self-immolations, eroding his support. In 1963, with U.S. tacit approval, South Vietnamese generals assassinated Diem in a coup. Instability followed, with multiple coups weakening Saigon. The Gulf of Tonkin incident in August 1964, alleged North Vietnamese attacks on U.S. ships, prompted Congress to pass the Tonkin Gulf Resolution, giving President Lyndon B. Johnson broad war powers. Many historians now question the incident's details, seeing it as a pretext for escalation. For Americans, it symbolized communist aggression. For Vietnamese communists, it was U.S. imperialism invading their sovereignty. The American War, Ground troops and attrition, 1965-1968. In 1965, Johnson committed U.S. combat troops, starting with Marines at Da Nang. Troop levels surged to 500,000 by 1968. The U.S. strategy under General William Westmoreland focused on search and destroy missions, body counts, and air power, including B-52 bombings and defoliants like Agent Orange, which devastated landscapes and caused long-term health issues. North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces, supplied by the trail, endured massive casualties but persisted, viewing the war as existential. From the North's lens, U.S. technology couldn't break their resolve. They drew on guerrilla warfare and Tet holidays for surprise attacks. South Vietnamese ARVN troops fought alongside Americans, but were often criticized for corruption and low morale, though some units performed heroically. International views varied. China and the USSR provided aid to Hanoi, while allies like Australia, South Korea, and Thailand sent troops to support the U.S. The Tet Offensive in January 1968 was a turning point. North Vietnamese and Viet Cong launched coordinated attacks on cities like Saigon and Hue, catching U.S. forces off guard. Militarily, it was a communist defeat, tens of thousands killed, but psychologically, it shattered U.S. public confidence. Media coverage, including the execution of a Viet Cong suspect on camera, fueled anti-war protests. For Hanoi, Tet exposed South Vietnam's fragility. For Saigon, it highlighted northern ruthlessness. Johnson halted bombing and declined re-election. Atrocities marred both sides. The Lai Massacre in 1968, where U.S. troops killed over 500 civilians, epitomized the war's brutality. North Vietnamese forces executed thousands during Hue's occupation, burying victims in mass graves. These events underscored the war's moral ambiguity, far from the heroic narratives peddled by propaganda. Vietnamization, expansion, and withdrawal, 1969-1973. Richard Nixon, elected in 1968, pursued Vietnamization, training ARVN to take over while withdrawing U.S. troops. He expanded the war into Cambodia, 1970, and Laos, 1971, to disrupt supply lines, sparking massive U.S. protests like Kent State shootings. From Cambodia's view, this destabilized the country, paving the way for Khmer Rouge genocide. North Vietnam launched the Easter Offensive in 1972, testing Vietnamization.